Hello and welcome back to the Sleepyhead Geographer. Let's take a moment together to release the stress and tension from your day. Feel your shoulders drop, your breathing slow, and your mind begin to settle. Tonight, we're going to journey together through one of Earth's most mystical and ancient landscapes. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the Scottish Highlands, where mist clings to towering peaks like whispered secrets from the past. Here, in this timeless realm, we'll discover how mountains were born from the collision of continents, how ice carved valleys that cradle silver locks, and how generations of Highland people have called this rugged paradise home. So settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin our story at the very beginning. Deep in Earth's ancient past, when the Scottish Highlands were nothing more than a dream waiting to be born. We're traveling back through time now, over 400 million years ago, to witness one of the most dramatic geological events in our planet's history. Picture our Earth as it was then, a world so different from today that it would seem like an alien planet. The continents we know didn't exist yet. Instead, vast pieces of the Earth's crust, like enormous puzzle pieces, drifted slowly across the surface of our planet. These pieces, called tectonic plates, carried with them the materials that would one day become Scotland. In those ancient times, there was no Britain at all. Instead, we had two separate land masses moving slowly but inevitably toward each other across a primordial ocean called the Iapetus Ocean. One piece carried what would become the Northern Highlands, while another carried the southern regions. Between them lay hundreds of miles of deep blue water, teeming with ancient sea creatures whose fossils we can still find today, pressed like flowers between the pages of Highland stone. As these vast continental plates drifted toward each other, at the pace of a growing fingernail, something magnificent was building beneath the waves. The ocean floor between them was slowly disappearing, consumed by the Earth's internal fires. This process, called subduction, was setting the stage for one of the most spectacular mountain-building events our planet has ever known. We can imagine the scene as these two ancient lands finally began to meet. The collision wasn't sudden like a car crash, but rather a slow-motion embrace that lasted for millions of years. As they pressed together, the rocks between them had nowhere to go but up. Layer upon layer of ancient seabed, some containing sediments that were already hundreds of millions of years old, began to fold and crumple like a vast geological accordion. This monumental event, which geologists call the Caledonian orogeny, gave birth to a mountain range that once rivaled the modern Himalayas in height and grandeur. Can we picture it? Peaks reaching perhaps 25,000 feet into the sky, their snow-covered summits piercing through clouds that had never known the shadow of such heights before. The heat and pressure of this collision did something magical to the rocks caught in between. Humble sediments that had once been nothing more than mud and sand on an ancient ocean floor were transformed into something entirely new. Under the immense forces at play, these materials became metamorphic rocks, their very atoms rearranged into beautiful patterns we can still see today in the glittering schists and gneisses of the highlands. Some of the rocks we'll encounter in our highland journey are even older than this great collision. In the far northwest, we can find stones called Lewisian gneiss, some of which are nearly 3 billion years old. These ancient witnesses have watched the Earth transform from a young, turbulent planet into the world we know today. When we touch these stones, we're connecting with a time when our planet was still learning how to be itself, when the very air was different and life was just beginning to experiment with complex forms. The Torridon sandstone tells another chapter of this ancient story. These remarkable red rocks, which give some highland mountains their distinctive rosy hue, were formed from sediments deposited in desert conditions over 1 billion years ago. They speak of a time when the future Scotland lay in tropical latitudes, baked under an alien sun in landscapes of sand dunes and seasonal rivers. As the great continental collision continued, it created not just mountains, but an entire geological architecture that would define the Highlands forever. Great sheets of rock, some hundreds of feet thick, were thrust over one another like enormous geological blankets. These thrust faults created the complex layering we see today, where older rocks sometimes lie on top of younger ones, defying our usual expectations of how the Earth should be arranged. The Moyne rocks, which form much of the central and eastern Highlands, tell their own story of transformation. Originally layers of sandy and muddy sediments deposited in shallow seas around 800 to 1,000 million years ago, they were heated and compressed by the continental collision until they became the beautiful, silvery rocks we can see gleaming on Highland mountainsides today. This great mountain-building event didn't just create the Highlands, it created a template for beauty that would inspire humans for millennia to come. The dramatic landscapes we love today, the sense of ancient power and timeless mystery that draws us to these mountains, all began in those moments when continents embraced and the Earth learned to reach toward the sky. As we stand in the present day, surrounded by the peaceful beauty of Highland glens and the gentle presence of these ancient peaks, it's remarkable to think that beneath our feet lies evidence of one of the most violent and spectacular events in Earth's history. These mountains are not just landscape features, they are monuments to the incredible forces that shape our planet, reminders that the ground beneath our feet has traveled unimaginable distances and witnessed transformations beyond our everyday experience. The story of the Highlands' birth reminds us that even the most solid and permanent-seeming aspects of our world are part of an ongoing story of change and transformation, a story in which we are all participants, brief but meaningful characters in the Earth's continuing epic of creation and renewal. From the birth of mountains, we now move forward through millions of years to witness the next great artist to work upon the Highland canvas. The ice came not once, but many times, each visit leaving its signature carved deep into the mountain stone. Let's step into this frozen world and watch as glaciers transformed raw mountain peaks into the lyrical landscape of lochs and glens that captures our hearts today. Picture Scotland around 2.5 million years ago, as the Earth entered a great cooling phase that would last until very recently in geological terms. The climate was shifting, and snow that fell on highland peaks began to linger longer each year, accumulating season after season until it compressed into solid ice. What began as innocent snowflakes gradually became vast rivers of ice, flowing slowly but inexorably down from the mountain heights. These weren't the small glaciers we might see in photographs of modern mountain ranges. These were ice sheets of almost unimaginable scale, covering virtually the entire highland landscape in frozen rivers that could be hundreds of feet thick. The ice was so deep in places that only the highest mountain peaks pierced through its surface, like rocky islands in a frozen sea. As this ice began to move, flowing downhill under its own immense weight, it became a sculptor of incredible power and precision. Unlike water, which flows around obstacles, ice pushed directly through them, grinding against rock faces with the persistence of millennia. Every pebble frozen into the glacier's base became a tool, every boulder a chisel, carving and scraping and polishing the mountain stone. The ice worked with infinite patience, following the paths of least resistance down ancient river valleys. But where rivers had carved modest channels, the glaciers excavated dramatic trenches, deepening and widening the valleys until they took on the distinctive U-shape that characterizes Highland glens today. We can still see this signature everywhere we look, the gentle curved sides of valleys that speak of ice rather than the sharp V-cuts made by flowing water. Glencoe provides one of the most spectacular examples of this glacial artistry. Here, ice carved a valley so deep and wide that it creates its own weather patterns, where mist pools like a visible memory of the ancient frozen rivers that once flowed here. The Three Sisters, those magnificent mountain peaks that guard the glen's entrance, were shaped by ice flowing around them like slow-motion rapids, leaving behind their dramatic profiles that have inspired poets and painters for generations. But the ice did more than simply carve valleys. In some places, it scooped out enormous basins in the mountain bedrock, hollowing out spaces that would later become some of Scotland's most beautiful lochs. Loch Lomond, Loch Katrina, Loch Ness, all these famous waters fill spaces that were excavated by glaciers, their depths a direct measure of the ice's incredible erosive power. The glaciers also created thousands of smaller features that add texture and intimacy to the highland landscape. Corries, those magnificent amphitheater-shaped hollows carved into mountainsides, began as simple snow patches that grew into small glaciers. Over thousands of years, these glaciers rotated slowly in their mountain hollows like enormous ice cream scoops, grinding out perfect circular basins. Many of these corries now hold small lochs, their dark waters reflecting the sky like mirrors left behind by the ice. As the glaciers moved, they didn't just remove material, they also transported it. Rocks torn from mountain peaks in the far north were carried hundreds of miles south, only to be deposited in places where they seem completely out of place today. These erratic boulders, as geologists call them, sit like gifts from distant mountains, their composition telling stories of journeys across a frozen landscape. The ice also created one of the Highlands' most distinctive and beautiful features, the hanging valleys. When large glaciers carved deep main valleys, smaller tributary glaciers carved their own valleys at higher elevations. When the ice finally melted, these smaller valleys were left hanging high above the main glen floors, creating the perfect conditions for Scotland's magnificent waterfalls. Every cascade that tumbles down a Highland mountainside is, in essence, a liquid memory of where ancient ice once flowed. During the coldest periods, the ice sheet was so extensive that it connected with glaciers from other mountain ranges, creating a continuous, frozen landscape that stretched across much of northern Britain. The wildlife that survived during these ice ages had to be hardy indeed, adapted to life on the edges of a frozen world. Many of the plants and animals we consider typically highland today are actually Ice Age survivors, species that learned to thrive in the harsh conditions at the margins of glacial landscapes. The ice came and went multiple times over the course of nearly 2 million years. Each glacial period carved the landscape a little deeper, polished the rock faces a little smoother, and added its own touches to the Highland symphony of stone and water. The most recent ice age ended only about 11,500 years ago, which in geological terms was practically yesterday. The landscapes we see today still bear the fresh marks of this relatively recent sculpting. Perhaps most remarkably, the ice left behind a landscape that seems designed for human enjoyment and inspiration. The gentle curves of glacial valleys create natural pathways that invite exploration. The lochs provide perfect mirrors for mountain reflections and peaceful spaces for contemplation. The varied topography created by glacial action offers endless opportunities for discovery, with each glen revealing new vistas and hidden corners. When we walk through a highland glen today, we're following paths that were first carved by ice. When we gaze across a loch toward distant mountains, we're seeing a view that was composed by glacial forces. The very quality of highland light, the way mist gathers in valleys and sunbeams slant through mountain gaps, is influenced by the shapes that ice carved into the landscape millions of years ago. As we continue our journey through the highlands, we carry with us this understanding of the ice's artistry. Every vista we'll encounter, every peaceful loch and dramatic mountain silhouette bears the signature of those ancient frozen rivers that transformed raw mountain peaks into a landscape that speaks directly to the human heart. The ice was perhaps the greatest artist ever to work upon the highland canvas, and its masterpiece continues to inspire and comfort us today. From the legacy of ice, we now turn to the water that gives the highlands their living, breathing character. Water in all its forms, from the gentlest mountain stream to the deepest mysterious loch, creates the highlands' liquid heart that pulses through every valley and glen. Let's follow these waters on their eternal journey from cloud to sea and discover the rich ecosystems and timeless beauty they create along the way. The highland water cycle begins high above us, in the marriage between warm, moisture-laden air from the Atlantic Ocean and the cool mountain peaks that rise to meet it. As these air masses encounter the highland mountains, they're forced upward into the cooler atmosphere, where their moisture condenses into clouds that seem to embrace the mountain tops like old friends returning home. This is why mist and cloud are such constant companions in the highlands. The mountains literally pull moisture from the sky, creating the perpetual dance of vapor and condensation that gives these landscapes their ethereal, otherworldly quality. When we see mist clinging to a mountainside, we're witnessing this ancient conversation between earth and sky, a dialogue that has continued unchanged for millions of years. The rain that falls here is remarkably pure, having traveled across thousands of miles of ocean before encountering land. This pristine water begins its highland journey as tiny rivulets that gather in the corries and hanging valleys carved by ancient glaciers. Each droplet carries with it microscopic minerals dissolved from the ancient rocks it touches, creating the subtly different flavors that make highland spring water so prized around the world. As these small streams descend from the heights, they merge with others to form the rushing burns that provide the soundtrack for so much of highland life. The word burn itself comes from the Old English burna, meaning a small stream, and these waterways are indeed the vital arteries that bring life to every highland glen. Following a highland burn downstream is like reading a geological autobiography written in stone and water. In its upper reaches, where the gradient is steep, the water moves with youthful energy, tumbling over granite ledges and carving small pools in the bedrock. The sound is bright and urgent, the voice of water eager to begin its journey to the sea. As the burn reaches the glen floor, its character changes. Here, it meanders more gently through deposits of glacial sediment, creating the fertile meadows where highland cattle graze and where, in summer, wildflowers create natural gardens of incredible beauty. The water moves more slowly now, with the measured pace of maturity, taking time to nurture the plant communities that depend on its presence. These highland waterways support an intricate web of life that has evolved specifically to thrive in these cool, clean conditions. The brown trout that inhabit these burns are descendants of fish that survived the ice ages, and they've developed a particular hardiness and beauty that reflects their highland environment. Their spotted flanks mirror the dappled light that filters through overhanging rowan and birch trees, making them nearly invisible in their crystal-clear pools. The Highland lochs represent water in its most contemplative mood. These glacial lakes serve as the landscape's memory banks, storing not just water, but also the accumulated stories of thousands of years of Highland weather. Each loch has its own personality, determined by the specific combination of geology, climate, and topography that created it. Loch Katrine, immortalized in Sir Walter Scott's poetry, exemplifies the mysterious beauty of Highland lochs. Its waters, so pure they're used to supply drinking water to Glasgow, lie cradled in a valley carved by glaciers and surrounded by mountains clothed in native woodland. The loch changes character throughout the day, sometimes lying mirror still to perfectly reflect the surrounding peaks, other times stirred by highland breezes into gentle waves that catch and scatter the light like liquid diamonds. Loch Ness, perhaps Scotland's most famous loch, demonstrates the almost supernatural depth that glacial action could achieve. At over 700 feet deep in places, it contains more water than all the lakes in England and Wales combined. Its dark waters, stained with natural tannins from the surrounding peat and vegetation, create an atmosphere of mystery that has inspired legends for centuries. These deep lochs support unique ecosystems that exist nowhere else on Earth. The cold, oxygen-rich waters provide perfect conditions for Arctic char, a fish species that survived from the Ice Age in these isolated highland waters. These fish live their entire lives in the deep, cold layers of the lochs, rising to the surface only briefly during their spawning season, like silver ghosts briefly visiting from another world. The plant life around highland waters tells its own story of adaptation and survival. Sphagnum mosses create the peat bogs that act as enormous natural sponges, slowly releasing water throughout the year and maintaining the steady flow that keeps highland burns running even during dry periods. These moss communities are incredibly efficient at capturing and storing carbon, making highland peatlands crucial allies in our planet's climate regulation. Along the loch shores, we find plant communities that exist in the transition zone between land and water. Cotton grass waves in the breeze like nature's prayer flags, while bog myrtle releases its sweet fragrance when brushed by passing deer. These plants have evolved to thrive in the acidic, nutrient-poor conditions created by highland geology and climate. The wildlife that depends on highland waters reads like a roll call of Scottish natural heritage. Red deer come to drink at dawn and dusk, their elegant forms reflected in the still water like living myths. Otters hunt in the shallows, their sleek bodies perfectly designed for life in the cool highland waters. Their presence indicates the exceptional purity of these waterways, as otters can only thrive in the cleanest aquatic environments. Highland waters also provide critical habitat for birds that have become symbols of wild Scotland. Common loons, known in Scotland as Great Northern Divers, nest on remote loch shores, their haunting calls echoing across the water like voices from the wilderness itself. Golden eagles often hunt along water margins, where fish and waterfowl create concentrated opportunities for these magnificent predators. The seasonal rhythm of highland waters creates an ever-changing symphony throughout the year. Spring brings the sound of snow melting and rushing down mountainsides, swelling the burns with crystal-clear water that carries the promise of renewal. Summer waters run more quietly but with steady persistence, supporting the lush growth that makes highland summers so beautiful. Autumn transforms the waterways into mirrors for the brilliant colors of highland foliage, while winter may freeze the smaller burns and coat loch shores with ice that creates abstract sculptures of stunning beauty. Throughout all these seasonal changes, the water continues its ancient work of shaping the landscape, dissolving minerals from rocks, transporting sediments, and supporting the web of life that makes the highlands a living, breathing ecosystem. Perhaps most importantly, highland waters provide a sense of peace and continuity that touches something deep in the human spirit. When we sit beside a highland loch or listen to a burn flowing through a glen, we're connecting with rhythms that are far older than human civilization, patterns of flow and renewal that link us to the fundamental processes that sustain all life on Earth. As we continue our journey through the highland landscape, we carry with us this appreciation for the sacred waters that give these mountains their voice and their life. Every stream we cross, every loch we contemplate, is part of this greater water story that connects mountain peak to ocean, sky to earth, and present moment to the eternal cycles that have shaped this remarkable landscape for millions of years. As we move deeper into our highland journey, let's discover the remarkable plant communities that have learned to thrive in this challenging landscape of wind and stone, cool summers and harsh winters. The highland flora tells a story of resilience and adaptation, of beauty found in the most unlikely places, and of ecological relationships that have developed over thousands of years since the ice last retreated from these mountains. The signature plant of the Scottish Highlands is, without question, the heather. When we think of highland landscapes, we picture the rolling hills painted in the purple and pink of heather bloom, stretching to distant horizons like a living carpet woven from the dreams of the earth itself. But heather is far more than just a beautiful backdrop. It's a keystone species that creates and maintains entire highland ecosystems. Common heather, known scientifically as Calluna vulgaris, is a master of survival in harsh conditions. Its small, needle-like leaves are designed to conserve moisture and resist the drying effects of highland winds. The leaves are so small and tightly arranged that they create their own microclimate around the plant's stems, reducing water loss and protecting the plant from temperature extremes. What makes heather truly remarkable is its relationship with the highland soil. In a landscape where glacial action has scraped away much of the fertile topsoil, heather has formed partnerships with specialized fungi called mycorrhizae that live in its root system. These fungi help heather extract nutrients from the acidic, nutrient-poor soils that characterize much of the highland landscape, while the heather provides the fungi with sugars produced through photosynthesis. The timing of heather's bloom is one of nature's most spectacular displays. From late July through September, entire mountainsides transform into seas of purple and pink that seem to glow with their own inner light. This mass flowering serves a crucial ecological purpose, providing nectar for countless insects just when they need it most to prepare for winter or complete their life cycles. The famous Highland honey produced from heather nectar has a unique jelly-like consistency and an intensely aromatic flavor that captures the essence of Highland summers. For centuries, Highland people have treasured this golden harvest, knowing that it carries within it the concentrated essence of thousands of acres of mountain heather, each flower touched by highland sun and mountain mist. But the highlands support far more diverse plant life than just heather moorland. In the sheltered glens and along the margins of lochs, we find remnants of the ancient Caledonian pine forest that once covered much of Highland Scotland. These Scots pines are not just trees, they're living links to a wilder Scotland, descendants of forests that established themselves immediately after the Ice Age ended. The Caledonian pines have a distinctive character that reflects their highland heritage. Unlike pines grown in softer climates, these trees develop thick, deeply furrowed bark that glows orange-red in the highland light, and their upper branches often take on fantastic twisted shapes, sculpted by years of highland winds. Each tree tells a story of endurance, written in the grain of its wood and the pattern of its growth rings. These ancient forest remnants support their own unique plant communities. The forest floor beneath the pines is carpeted with blaeberries, their small blue fruits providing food for grouse, deer, and countless smaller creatures. Juniper bushes, some of which can live for hundreds of years, create intricate sculptures of blue-green foliage that perfume the forest air with their distinctive gin-like scent. In the deepest shade of the pine groves, we might discover some of the highlands' most specialized plants. Twinflower, a delicate pink-flowered plant, grows in carpets beneath the trees, while various ferns unfurl their fronds in the dappled light. These plants represent a flora that once covered much of northern Europe after the Ice Age, now surviving in small refugia scattered across the highland landscape. The highland flora also includes remarkable Arctic alpine plants that survive on the highest mountain peaks. These are true Ice Age survivors, species that retreated upward as the climate warmed after the glaciers melted, finding refuge on wind-swept summits where conditions still resemble those of the tundra landscape that once extended across all of northern Scotland. On Ben Nevis and other high peaks, we can find cushions of moss campion, their tight-packed pink flowers creating natural rock gardens at elevations where few other plants can survive. Mountain avens spreads its white flowers across rocky ledges, while purple saxifrage finds footholds in the tiniest cracks in the stone. These plants have evolved extreme strategies for survival, growing in compact cushions to conserve heat and moisture, and timing their brief growing seasons to make the most of the short highland summers at altitude. The highland bogs represent another specialized plant community, one that has developed in the waterlogged conditions created by high rainfall and poor drainage. Sphagnum mosses dominate these landscapes, creating deep peat deposits that can be thousands of years old. These moss communities function like enormous natural sponges, absorbing rainfall during wet periods and slowly releasing it during drier times, helping to regulate the flow of highland burns and lochs throughout the year. Within the bog communities, we find plants that have evolved fascinating strategies for surviving in nutrient-poor conditions. Sundews and butterworts are carnivorous plants that supplement their nutrition by trapping and digesting insects. Their leaves glisten with sticky droplets that attract small flies, which become stuck and are slowly dissolved, providing these plants with nutrients they can't obtain from the acidic bog soil. Cotton grass creates one of the highlands' most beautiful seasonal displays, its white, fluffy seed heads dancing in the wind across highland moors like nature's own cotton field. This plant is perfectly adapted to bog conditions, with specialized air channels in its roots that allow it to breathe even when growing in waterlogged soils. The seasonal rhythm of highland plant life creates an ever-changing tapestry of color and texture throughout the year. Spring brings the bright green of new growth breaking through winter's brown dormancy, accompanied by the cheerful yellow of gorse flowers that bloom despite cool temperatures. Early summer sees the forest floor carpeted with wood sorrel and wild garlic, their white flowers creating galaxy-like patterns in the dappled shade. Summer's peak brings not only the famous heather bloom, but also the more subtle beauty of highland grasses, from the silver-purple seed heads of purple moor grass to the delicate movements of hairgrass on mountain slopes. Hidden among the heather, we might discover the bright pink bells of cross-leaved heath or the tiny white flowers of heath bedstraw. Autumn transforms the highland flora into a brilliant display of color as the leaves of rowan trees turn bright red and yellow, while their berries provide crucial food for migrating birds. Bracken ferns turn golden brown, creating warm-colored backdrops for the last purple heather blooms of the season. Even winter has its botanical beauty in the highlands, as evergreen plants provide structure and color against the snow. Scots pines wear mantles of white that emphasize their sculptural forms, while juniper and heather create subtle patterns of green and brown that show through the snow cover. Perhaps most remarkably, highland plants have learned to thrive in partnership with each other and with the animals that share their landscape. Heather provides shelter for red grouse, which in turn help spread seeds and create the disturbance patterns that maintain healthy moorland ecosystems. Rowan trees provide berries for birds, which spread their seeds to establish new trees in suitable locations. The highland flora also holds deep cultural significance for the people who have lived among these plants for thousands of years. Highland healers developed an extensive knowledge of plant medicines, using everything from willow bark for pain relief to bog myrtle as an insect repellent. Many highland plants feature in traditional stories and folklore, from the protective powers attributed to rowan trees to the associations between heather and good fortune. As we walk through highland landscapes, we're surrounded by plant communities that represent millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of adaptation to post-glacial conditions. Each plant we encounter, from the humblest moss to the most ancient pine tree, is a survivor and a success story, perfectly adapted to life in one of Europe's most challenging and beautiful environments. The highland flora reminds us that beauty and resilience often go hand in hand, that the harshest conditions can produce the most remarkable adaptations, and that every landscape, no matter how wild or remote, is a community of living beings that have learned to support and sustain each other through countless generations. In the quiet hours of highland dawn, when mist still clings to the lower slopes and the first light touches the mountain peaks, the true spirit of these ancient lands reveals itself through the wildlife that calls this demanding landscape home. Let's walk softly through this highland morning and meet the remarkable creatures that have adapted to life among the peaks and glens, each one a testament to the power of evolution to create beauty and resilience in equal measure. Our journey begins with perhaps the most iconic of all highland animals, the red deer. These magnificent creatures are the largest land mammals in Britain, and they embody the wild dignity that we associate with highland landscapes. Red deer have lived in Scotland for over 11,000 years, arriving shortly after the Ice Age ended and establishing themselves as one of the Highlands' most successful large mammals. A Highland red deer stag in full antler is one of nature's most impressive sights. Standing over 4 feet at the shoulder, with antlers that can span 4 feet across, these animals carry themselves with a regal bearing that has inspired artists and writers for centuries. But it's during the autumn rut that red deer truly command the Highland stage. As we listen to a stag's roar echoing across a morning glen, we're hearing a sound that has resonated through these valleys for millennia, a primal call that connects us to the deepest roots of Highland wildness. The hinds, the female red deer, demonstrate their own remarkable adaptations to Highland life. They've developed an extraordinary ability to find nutritious food among the limited plant communities of the Highland landscape, grazing on heather, grasses, and browse in a carefully orchestrated sequence that maximizes their nutritional intake throughout the changing seasons. Their calves, born in late spring after the harshest Highland weather has passed, develop quickly under their mother's watchful care, learning the complex geography of their home range and the seasonal patterns that will keep them alive through highland winters. Red deer have shaped highland landscapes just as much as the landscape has shaped them. Their grazing patterns help maintain the open moorland character of much of the highland landscape, preventing scrub and forest from taking over the hills. Their well-worn paths, carved by countless generations of hooves, create the network of trails that still guides human travelers through highland terrain today. High above the deer pastures, another highland icon patrols the mountain air. The golden eagle, with its 8-foot wingspan and piercing gaze, represents the wild freedom that many people seek when they come to the highlands. These magnificent birds of prey have evolved to hunt over the vast open spaces of highland moorland, using their incredible eyesight to spot movement from distances that would challenge even the best human vision. Golden eagles are patient hunters, often spending hours riding the mountain thermals while scanning the landscape below for opportunities. When they do hunt, their power and precision are breathtaking to witness. Diving from great heights, they can reach speeds that would destroy lesser birds, yet they maintain perfect control right up to the moment they strike their prey with talons powerful enough to crush bone. But golden eagles are more than just efficient predators. They're ecosystem engineers. By controlling populations of rabbits, grouse, and other prey species, they help maintain the complex balance of highland ecosystems. Their presence indicates healthy, functioning mountain environments, and their absence often signals ecological problems that may not be immediately obvious to human observers. The golden eagle's hunting territory can encompass dozens of square miles, and pairs mate for life, returning year after year to the same nesting sites. These enormous nests, called eyries, are often built on inaccessible cliff ledges and may be used by successive generations of eagles for decades, growing larger each year as new material is added to the structure. In the forests and woodlands scattered through highland glens, we encounter one of Scotland's most elusive residents, the red squirrel. These charming creatures, with their distinctive ear tufts and rich russet coats, represent the original squirrel inhabitants of highland forests. Unlike their larger grey cousins, red squirrels are perfectly adapted to life in the coniferous forests that characterize much of Highland Scotland. Red squirrels have an intimate relationship with Scots pine trees that goes back thousands of years. Their nimble paws and sharp claws allow them to navigate the smallest branches with ease, while their excellent spatial memory helps them locate the thousands of pine seeds they cache throughout their territory each autumn. Watching a red squirrel work its way through a pine canopy is like observing a master acrobat performing in a three-dimensional world that exists far above our ground-bound perspective. These forest dwellers change color with the seasons, their coats becoming darker and more luxurious in winter to provide better insulation against highland cold. Their ear tufts, which become more prominent in winter, aren't just decorative features but serve as important communication tools, helping squirrels signal their intentions to others of their kind across the forest canopy. Among highland waters, both flowing and still, we find creatures that represent some of evolution's most successful designs for aquatic life. The otter, Scotland's largest carnivorous mammal, has made highland lochs and rivers its kingdom. These playful yet powerful hunters are perfectly designed for their dual life on land and in water, with dense waterproof fur that traps air for insulation and powerful tail that serves as both rudder and propeller. Otters are indicator species for healthy highland waterways. Their presence tells us that a loch or burn has clean water, abundant fish populations, and undisturbed shoreline habitat for denning. When we're fortunate enough to spot an otter family playing in a highland loch, we're witnessing not just charming animal behavior, but confirmation that this particular aquatic ecosystem is thriving. The otter's hunting technique is a marvel of underwater efficiency. They can hold their breath for several minutes while pursuing fish through the underwater forests of highland lochs, using their sensitive whiskers to detect movement even in murky water. Their powerful jaws and sharp teeth make quick work of trout, salmon, and eels. But otters also supplement their diet with frogs, water voles, and even water birds when the opportunity arises. Highland waters also support populations of water voles, often called water rats, though they're actually more closely related to lemmings than to rats. These endearing rodents create extensive burrow systems in highland riverbanks, their underwater entrances providing safety from aerial and terrestrial predators. Water voles are excellent swimmers despite their chunky appearance, and they play crucial roles in highland wetland ecosystems by controlling vegetation growth and providing food for various predators. The bird life of the highlands represents some of Britain's most spectacular and specialized species. The ptarmigan, a master of high-altitude survival, changes its plumage with the seasons from brown summer camouflage to pure white winter protection. These hardy grouse live year-round above the tree line, feeding on highland plants that other birds find inedible and surviving winter conditions that would defeat most creatures. Ptarmigan have developed remarkable behavioral and physiological adaptations to highland mountain life. Their feet are completely feathered, providing natural snowshoes that prevent them from sinking into soft snow. During winter storms, they burrow into snowdrifts for protection, creating temporary shelters that take advantage of snow's insulating properties. Red grouse, the ptarmigan's lowland cousins, have formed one of the most intimate relationships with highland heather of any animal species. These birds depend so completely on heather for food, shelter, and nesting sites that their population fluctuations directly reflect the health of highland moorland ecosystems. Male red grouse establish territories in prime heather habitat and defend them vigorously, their distinctive go back call becoming part of the highland morning chorus from early spring through summer. The relationship between red grouse and heather goes beyond simple dependence. Grouse droppings provide fertilizer for heather plants, while their feeding habits help maintain the mix of young and mature heather that creates the most productive moorland habitat. This ancient partnership between bird and plant helps explain why heather moorland has remained stable in the highlands for thousands of years. Highland streams and lochs support native populations of brown trout that have evolved in isolation since the Ice Age ended. These highland trout are perfectly adapted to the cool, clean waters of their mountain homes, developing deep golden colors that reflect the peaty waters they inhabit and gaining remarkable strength from navigating highland burns in spate. Highland brown trout have learned to make the most of short mountain summers, feeding intensively during the brief period when insect life explodes around highland waters. They time their spawning to take advantage of autumn floods that provide access to suitable gravel beds, and their young emerge just as spring warming begins to increase food availability in highland waters. The pure insect life of the highlands, though often overlooked, forms the foundation upon which much highland wildlife depends. Highland moths, many found nowhere else in Britain, have adapted to the specific plant communities of mountain and moorland. The emperor moth, with its beautiful eye spots and fuzzy body designed for warmth, represents dozens of highland moth species that have learned to complete their life cycles in the brief highland summers. Mountain flies, though often considered pests by highland visitors, play crucial roles in highland ecosystems. They provide food for countless birds, spiders, and other creatures, while also serving as pollinators for many highland plants. Their abundance during certain weather conditions reflects the boom and bust cycles that characterize life in mountain environments. Perhaps most fascinating are the Highlands' smaller predators, creatures like the stoat and weasel that hunt among the rocks and heather with lightning speed and fearless determination. These mustelids punch well above their weight class, with stoats capable of taking prey much larger than themselves, and weasels able to follow mice and voles into burrows too small for any other predator. Stoats, known as ermines when they wear their white winter coats, demonstrate another Highland adaptation to seasonal change. Their color change provides perfect camouflage against snow, while their high-energy lifestyle requires constant hunting to fuel their rapid metabolisms. The Highland wildlife community also includes creatures of the night that most visitors never encounter. Bats, including several species that push the northern limits of their range in Highland Scotland, emerge as darkness falls to hunt insects above Highland lochs and glens. Pine martens, Scotland's second-largest carnivore, hunt through the forest canopy with cat-like agility, preying on squirrels, birds, and insects with equal skill. As dawn breaks fully over our Highland landscape, revealing the intricate web of relationships that connect all these creatures to each other and to their mountain environment, we begin to understand that Highland wildlife represents far more than just a collection of individual species. These animals are part of an ancient community that has learned to thrive in one of Europe's most challenging environments, each species filling its own crucial role in maintaining the ecological balance that keeps the Highlands wild and beautiful. Every creature we've encountered, from the mightiest red deer stag to the tiniest Highland midge, carries within its genes the accumulated wisdom of thousands of generations of Highland survivors. They remind us that wildness isn't just about untouched landscapes, but about the complex relationships between living things that have learned to support and sustain each other through countless seasons of Highland weather, creating communities that are greater than the sum of their parts. As we walk deeper into the Highland landscape, we begin to hear other voices carried on the mountain wind, human voices that speak of love, loss, loyalty, and survival in these demanding hills. The story of Highland clans is woven into every glen and peak, a tale of families who learned to live in harmony with this harsh but beautiful landscape, developing cultures and traditions that reflected both the challenges and the gifts of Highland life. The clan system that defined Highland society for over 1,000 years was far more than just a way of organizing families and territories. It represented a complete worldview that saw the landscape itself as part of the extended family, a living entity that provided for the clan's needs while requiring respect, protection, and intimate knowledge in return. The word clan itself comes from the Gaelic clan, meaning children, and this familial connection extended far beyond blood relationships to encompass entire communities bound together by shared landscapes, common experiences, and mutual obligations. When a Highland clan chief spoke of his people, he wasn't asserting ownership, but acknowledging a responsibility that extended across generations, a sacred trust to protect not just the clan members, but also the land that sustained them all. Each Highland glen tells its own clan story, carved not just by ice and water, but by generations of human dreams and struggles. Glen Coe speaks of the MacDonalds, whose tragic story reminds us that Highland history was often written in blood and betrayal. The massacre that took place here in 1692 wasn't just an attack on a single family, but an assault on the entire Highland way of life, an attempt to break the bonds between people and place that had sustained Highland culture for centuries. Yet even in tragedy, the Glen Coe MacDonald story demonstrates the remarkable resilience of Highland people. The survivors didn't abandon their glen, but rebuilt their lives among the mountains that had witnessed their suffering, proving that the connection between Highland clans and their ancestral landscapes ran deeper than any political conflict could sever. The MacLeods of Skye created a different kind of Highland legacy, one that celebrated the artistic and cultural achievements possible when clan society provided stability and patronage for poets, musicians, and storytellers. Dunvegan Castle, their ancient stronghold, housed one of the most important centres of Gaelic culture in Scotland, where bards composed the poems and songs that preserved Highland history and values across generations. The MacLeod Pipers, hereditary musicians whose musical knowledge was passed from father to son for centuries, developed the complex art of Pio Beiricht, the classical music of the Highland bagpipes. These elaborate compositions weren't just entertainment, but musical portraits of clan history, with specific pieces commemorating battles, celebrating marriages, or mourning the deaths of beloved chiefs. In the Central Highlands, the Campbells built their power through a combination of political acumen and genuine understanding of how to make Highland landscapes productive. Their seat at Inverary became a model of how clan society could adapt to changing times while maintaining its essential Highland character. The Campbell chiefs understood that true leadership in the Highlands meant not just commanding loyalty, but demonstrating the knowledge and skills necessary for successful Highland life. The MacGregors, by contrast, represent the Highland clans' struggle to maintain independence in the face of external pressure. Outlawed for centuries and forbidden even to use their own name, the MacGregors developed into master survivors who knew every hidden path and secret glen in their Highland territories. Their story reminds us that Highland landscapes provided not just resources, but refuge, offering sanctuary to those who understood the mountain's moods and secrets. Rob Roy MacGregor, perhaps the most famous of all Highland outlaws, embodied the complex relationship between Highland clans and the wider political world. His ability to disappear into the Highland landscape when pursued by government forces wasn't just a matter of knowing good hiding places. It reflected a lifetime of intimate knowledge about how to read weather patterns, how to find food and shelter in the wilderness, and how to move unseen through terrain that defeated his enemies. The everyday life of Highland clans revolved around seasonal patterns that connected human activities directly to the natural rhythms of their mountain environment. Summer meant driving cattle to the high pastures, a practice called transhumance that took advantage of the brief growing season in Highland corries and glen heads. These summer settlements, called sheelings, were temporary communities where young people learned the skills of Highland survival while the cattle grew fat on mountain grass. The shealing season was also a time for storytelling, music, and courtship, when the isolation of winter gave way to the social connections that bound Highland communities together. Around the shealing fires, clan genealogies were recited, traditional songs were taught to the next generation, and the complex web of relationships that defined clan society was renewed and strengthened. Autumn brought the cattle back to the lower glens and the crucial work of preparing for Highland winter. This was when clan society demonstrated its greatest strength, the ability of extended families to work together for mutual survival. Every member of the community had essential roles to play, from the children who helped gather and dry peat for fuel to the elders whose weather wisdom could mean the difference between adequate preparation and winter disaster. The Highland clan system also developed sophisticated approaches to resource management that allowed human communities to thrive in landscapes where individual survival would have been nearly impossible. Clan territories weren't just political boundaries, but carefully managed ecosystems where different areas were used for specific purposes at specific times of year. The clan's common grazing lands were managed according to complex traditional rules that prevented overuse while ensuring that every family had access to the resources they needed. Peat bogs were divided into sections, with each family allowed to cut fuel from designated areas in rotation, ensuring that the bogs could regenerate while providing a sustainable source of winter heating. Highland forests, though diminished by the clan period, were treated as precious resources requiring careful stewardship. Clan rules governed when and where trees could be cut, with strict penalties for wasteful or unauthorized harvesting. The clan chiefs understood that their authority ultimately depended on the landscape's ability to support their people, making environmental stewardship a matter of political survival. The spiritual life of Highland clans was intimately connected to their landscapes in ways that modern people often find difficult to understand. Sacred sites weren't separate from everyday life, but integrated into the clan's territorial geography, with specific locations holding religious significance that reinforced the community's connection to their ancestral lands. Many Highland clans maintained traditional burial grounds in remote locations that required considerable effort to reach, demonstrating that the connection between people and place was expected to continue even after death. These clan cemeteries, often located on islands in highland lochs or in secluded mountain glens, represent one of the most profound expressions of the Highland belief that families belonged to their landscapes as much as landscapes belonged to families. The clan system also preserved and transmitted the Gaelic language, which wasn't just a means of communication, but a way of understanding and describing Highland landscapes that captured subtleties lost in English translation. Gaelic place names contain detailed information about landscape features, historical events, and resource locations that represent thousands of years of accumulated Highland knowledge. When we hear names like Bain Éige, File Mountain, or Coire Gabhail, Corrie of Capture, we're receiving messages from Highland ancestors about the character and history of specific places. These names aren't just labels, but capsule descriptions that helped clan members navigate and understand their complex mountain territories. The decline of the clan system following the Battle of Culloden in 1746 represented far more than just a political defeat. It marked the beginning of the end for a way of life that had successfully adapted human communities to Highland landscapes for over a millennium. The government's systematic destruction of Highland culture, through laws banning traditional dress, weapons, and music, was designed to break the bonds between Highland people and their ancestral lands. Yet Highland clan heritage survived in ways that its enemies never anticipated. The great Highland emigrations of the 18th and 19th centuries carried clan traditions and Highland values to new lands around the world, where they adapted to new environments while maintaining their essential character. Highland games, clan societies, and Gaelic cultural organizations kept the clan spirit alive in places far from the original Highland glens. Perhaps most importantly, the clan heritage provided a model for sustainable community life that modern Highland residents continue to draw upon. The understanding that human communities must adapt to their landscapes rather than trying to force landscapes to adapt to human desires remains relevant in an age of climate change and environmental challenge. As we stand in a Highland glen today, surrounded by the ruins of old settlements and the ghosts of vanished communities, we can still feel the presence of the clan generations who called these places home. Their voices speak to us through the Gaelic names they gave to every hill and stream, through the traditional songs that celebrate Highland beauty, and through the deep respect for landscape and community that remains part of Highland culture today. The clan heritage reminds us that the Highland landscape we admire today isn't just a natural wilderness, but a cultural landscape shaped by generations of people who understood that true belonging requires not just loving a place, but taking responsibility for its well-being across generations. In their successes and failures, their wisdom and their mistakes, the Highland clans offer us lessons about how human communities can learn to live sustainably within the constraints and opportunities offered by challenging but beautiful environments. In the soft Highland twilight, when the boundary between day and night becomes as fluid as morning mist, we enter the most mysterious chapter of our Highland journey. Here, scattered across the ancient landscape like forgotten dreams made manifest in stone, we discover the sacred sites that speak to humanity's longest relationship with these mystical mountains. These are places where the physical and spiritual worlds seem to touch, where our ancestors left messages in stone that continue to whisper across the centuries. The standing stones of the Highlands rise from their moorland settings like ancient sentinels, their weathered face bearing witness to thousands of years of Highland history. These megalithic monuments, erected by Neolithic peoples over 4,000 years ago, represent some of humanity's earliest attempts to create permanent markers of sacred significance in the Highland landscape. At Callanish on the Isle of Lewis, we encounter one of Europe's most spectacular stone circles, a cosmic temple composed of Lewisian gneiss that was already ancient when the circle was built. The main circle consists of 13 standing stones arranged around a central monolith, with stone avenues extending in 4 directions like the arms of a great cross laid upon the Highland earth. The builders of Callanish chose their location with extraordinary precision, selecting a site where the surrounding landscape creates natural sightlines to important astronomical events. During certain years, the moon appears to travel along the profile of a distant ridge known as the Sleeping Beauty, creating a celestial dance that connects sky and earth in a way that still moves modern observers to wonder and reverence. These stone circles weren't built as isolated monuments, but as integral parts of sacred landscapes that encompassed entire regions. The placement of each stone was carefully calculated not just for its astronomical alignments, but for its relationship to natural landscape features, like hills, lochs, and prominent rock formations. The ancient builders understood that sacred space isn't created by human effort alone, but emerges from the collaboration between human intention and natural power. Walking among the Callanish stones at sunrise, when the morning light sets the ancient gneiss glowing like captured starlight, we can sense something of what drew Neolithic peoples to invest such enormous effort in creating these monuments. The stones seem to channel and focus the natural energies of their Highland setting, creating spaces where the ordinary rules of time and causation feel temporarily suspended. Similar circles throughout the Highlands tell variations of the same story, each adapted to its specific landscape setting and local conditions. The Ring of Brodgar in Orkney, though technically beyond the Highland mainland, represents the same megalithic tradition extended to island settings, where the interplay between stone monuments and surrounding water creates even more complex patterns of reflection and resonance. The smaller stone circles scattered through Highland glens often occupy positions that seem chosen for their intimate relationship with local landscape features. These circles frequently incorporate natural boulders or prominent rock outcrops into their designs, blurring the boundary between human construction and natural formation in ways that suggest their builders saw no fundamental separation between artificial and natural forms of sacred expression. Beyond the stone circles, Highland landscapes preserve other forms of ancient sacred architecture that speak to different aspects of spiritual relationship with the mountain environment. Burial cairns, Those carefully constructed stone mounds that crown so many highland peaks and prominent ridges represent a tradition of honoring the dead by placing them in positions of power and prominence within the landscape. The great chambered cairns of the Highlands, like Maeshowe in Orkney or the grey cairns of Camster in Caithness, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of both engineering and astronomy. These monuments were designed not just to protect burials, but to channel light from specific astronomical events into their interior chambers, creating spaces where the movements of sun, moon, and stars could be experienced as direct spiritual encounters. The builders of these cairns chose their locations to maximize both practical and symbolic advantages. Hilltop positions provided commanding views of surrounding territories, while also ensuring that the cairns would be visible from great distances, serving as permanent landmarks that connected scattered communities to shared ancestors and common spiritual traditions. Many Highland cairns incorporate passages and chambers aligned with significant astronomical events, particularly the midwinter sunrise. During the few days around the winter solstice, light penetrates deep into these stone chambers, illuminating carved symbols and creating dramatic light displays that transform burial spaces into theatres of cosmic drama. The cup and ring marks carved into Highland rock faces represent another mysterious form of ancient sacred art. These abstract designs, pecked into rock surfaces throughout the Highlands over 4,000 years ago, may represent maps of spiritual territories, astronomical observations, or symbolic representations of water and landscape features. Their true meaning remains elusive, but their widespread distribution suggests they were part of a shared symbolic language that extended across much of Highland Scotland. Rock art sites often occupy positions with spectacular views or unusual acoustic properties, suggesting that these locations were chosen for ceremonies that involved both visual and auditory elements. The carved rocks may have served as focal points for rituals that celebrated the relationship between human communities and their landscape settings. Highland folklore preserves memories of how these ancient sacred sites continued to hold meaning for later generations. Stone circles were often incorporated into traditional festivals and seasonal celebrations, with communities gathering at these ancient monuments to mark important transitions in the agricultural and social year. Many Highland stone circles acquired associations with healing, prophecy, and magical protection that persisted well into historical times. People continued to visit these sites for rituals related to childbirth, marriage, and death, suggesting that their sacred power transcended the specific religious beliefs of their original builders. The Gaelic tradition of thin places, locations where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds becomes permeable, often identifies the same locations that attracted Neolithic monument builders. This continuity suggests that certain Highland landscapes possess inherent qualities that make them naturally suitable for spiritual experience across different cultures and time periods. Highland springs and wells represent another category of sacred site, where ancient spiritual traditions continued to evolve through successive cultural periods. These water sources, often associated with healing properties or prophetic powers, attracted pilgrims and celebrants for thousands of years. Many Highland wells preserve traditions that blend pre-Christian water worship with later Celtic Christian practices. The elaborate rituals associated with Highland sacred wells often involved offerings of coins, cloth strips, or small personal objects that were left at the site as payments for spiritual favors or as thanks for answered prayers. These traditions created distinctive visual signatures around Highland springs, where trees and bushes became decorated with the accumulated offerings of generations of pilgrims. Highland mountains themselves held sacred significance that extended beyond their roles as platforms for constructed monuments. Specific peaks were associated with deities, legendary figures, or ancestral spirits that required respect and appropriate ritual acknowledgement from those who ventured onto their slopes. Ben Nevis, Scotland's highest peak, preserves traditions that associate its summit with powerful spiritual entities that could influence weather and human fortune. Similar traditions surround many other highland peaks, creating a sacred geography that encompasses entire mountain ranges rather than just isolated monument sites. The Celtic Christian period added new layers of sacred meaning to highland landscapes, while often incorporating and adapting existing sacred sites. Many highland churches were built at locations that had previously held pre-Christian religious significance, creating continuity of sacred use that extended across major cultural transitions. Highland sculptured stones from the early Christian period demonstrate sophisticated fusion of Celtic artistic traditions with Christian symbolism, creating monuments that speak to both Christian faith and continuing connection to older Highland spiritual traditions. These carved stones often incorporate natural landscape features into their designs, maintaining the ancient principle that sacred art should enhance rather than compete with natural beauty. The medieval period saw the development of Highland pilgrimage routes that connected sacred sites across extensive regional networks. These pilgrimage paths followed ancient trackways that had served Highland communities for thousands of years, creating journeys that were as much about experiencing sacred landscape as about reaching specific destinations. Highland monasteries, often established in remote locations that emphasized separation from worldly concerns, developed into centers of learning and artistic achievement that preserved and transmitted both Christian traditions and older forms of Highland spiritual wisdom. The illuminated manuscripts produced in Highland monasteries often incorporate design elements derived from much older symbolic traditions. The Reformation and subsequent cultural changes disrupted many Highland sacred traditions, but the landscapes themselves retained their mysterious power to inspire spiritual reflection and wonder. Romantic period writers and artists rediscovered Highland sacred sites as sources of sublime experience that could elevate human consciousness above everyday concerns. Modern visitors to Highland sacred sites often report experiences of unusual peace, clarity, or spiritual insight that seem to emerge from the places themselves rather than from personal belief systems. These experiences suggest that the ancient site builders may have identified locations with inherent properties that facilitate altered states of consciousness or enhanced spiritual awareness. Contemporary archaeological research reveals increasingly sophisticated understanding of how Highland sacred sites were designed to create specific sensory and psychological effects. The acoustic properties of stone circles, the astronomical alignments of burial chambers, and the landscape positions of rock art sites all demonstrate that ancient builders possessed detailed knowledge of how physical environments influence human consciousness. As we stand among ancient stones in the Highland twilight, surrounded by landscape that has inspired spiritual reflection for thousands of years, we participate in a tradition of wonder and reverence that connects us across vast spans of time to the earliest Highland peoples. These sacred sites remind us that some places on Earth seem naturally designed to lift human awareness beyond ordinary concerns, creating opportunities for the kind of expanded consciousness that different cultures have always recognized as essential to fully human life. The mystical landscapes of the Highlands continue to offer these opportunities today, inviting us to experience the same sense of connection between earth and sky, past and present, human and natural, that drew our ancestors to mark these places as sacred and to return to them generation after generation for renewal and inspiration. As our Highland journey continues through the turning wheel of seasons, we discover that these ancient mountains don't simply endure the changing year, but dance with it, transforming themselves through subtle shifts of color, light, and mood that create an ever-evolving masterpiece of natural beauty. Let's follow this seasonal dance through a complete Highland year, witnessing how the same landscape can offer entirely different gifts as winter gives way to spring, spring unfolds into summer, and autumn prepares the way for winter's return. Highland spring arrives not with a sudden flourish, but with a gradual awakening that begins in the lengthening days of February and extends well into May. The first signs are often so subtle that they require the experienced eye of someone who has learned to read the Highland landscape's moods. Snow begins to retreat from all but the highest peaks, revealing the brown and purple tapestry of dormant heather and grass that has waited patiently beneath winter's white blanket. The Highland burns, swollen with snowmelt and spring rains, sing with renewed energy as they carry the mountain's stored winter moisture toward the sea. Their voices change from winter's muted murmur to spring's eager chatter, announcing to every glen that the season of renewal has begun. Along their banks, the first green shoots of grass and the pale yellow flowers of coltsfoot create subtle accents of color against the predominantly brown landscape. Highland birch trees, those graceful survivors that find footholds in rocky glens and on exposed hillsides, begin to show the faintest green haze of developing leaves. This early leafing makes birch groves some of the first places where Highland spring becomes visually obvious, their delicate foliage creating veils of green light that filter the strengthening sun. The bird life of the Highlands responds to spring's arrival with an explosion of activity that transforms the acoustic landscape as dramatically as visual changes transform the scenery. Red grouse begin their territorial displays, their distinctive calls echoing across heather moors that will soon support their nesting activities. Golden eagles, having endured another Highland winter, begin the elaborate courtship flights that will lead to new generations of these magnificent mountain monarchs. Highland lochs, still cold from winter but beginning to warm in the shallow areas near their shores, support increasing activity from water birds that have waited through the harsh months for conditions suitable for nesting. Common loons return to their remote breeding lochs, their haunting calls once again providing the soundtrack for Highland evenings. As spring advances through April and into May, the Highland landscape begins to reveal the full extent of its seasonal transformation. Gorse bushes burst into brilliant yellow bloom, their coconut-scented flowers creating patches of tropical color that seem almost impossibly bright against the still muted Highland backdrop. This golden display often coincides with periods of clear, bright weather that make Highland spring one of the most optimistic seasons for visitors. The Scots pines of remnant Caledonian forests respond to warming temperatures and lengthening days with fresh growth that creates bright green contrasts against their mature, dark green foliage. These ancient trees, having survived another Highland winter, demonstrate their resilience by producing vigorous new growth that will help them face whatever challenges the coming year might bring. Highland spring reaches its crescendo in late May and early June, when the coordination between warming temperatures, adequate moisture, and sufficient daylight creates conditions for explosive plant growth. The landscape transforms almost overnight from the browns and greys of dormant winter to the fresh greens of early summer. This transformation is so dramatic that visitors returning to familiar highland locations after even a few weeks' absence often struggle to recognize landmarks that seemed permanent just days before. Highland summer begins with the longest days of the year, when northern Scotland experiences nearly 19 hours of daylight, and the brief twilight hours seem to stretch endlessly. This abundance of light creates growing conditions that, combined with adequate moisture and moderate temperatures, support some of the most intense plant growth found anywhere on Earth. The famous Highland heather begins its preparation for the spectacular bloom that will define late summer landscapes. Through June and July, heather plants concentrate their energy on developing the flower buds that will create the purple seas of color for which Highland summers are justly famous. During this preparation period, heather moorlands take on a subtle beauty of anticipation, their gray-green foliage creating a muted backdrop for the brilliant displays to come. Highland summers are also the season of maximum wildlife activity, when the brief abundance of food and favorable weather conditions support the intensive breeding activities that must produce new generations capable of surviving another Highland winter. Red deer hinds give birth to calves in sheltered corries and glen heads, while golden eagles provision hungry eaglets with prey captured from the rich summer hunting grounds. The long Highland summer days provide extended opportunities for wildlife observation and photography, but they also reveal one of the Highlands' most challenging aspects for human visitors: the abundance of biting insects that emerge during warm, still weather. Highland midges, though frustrating for unprepared visitors, play crucial ecological roles as pollinators and food sources for countless other Highland creatures. Highland burns and lochs reach their warmest temperatures during summer months, supporting maximum activity from fish populations and creating the best conditions for observing the subtle interactions between aquatic and terrestrial Highland ecosystems. Brown trout rise to feed on insects hatching from Highland waters, while otters take advantage of warm weather to play and hunt in full view of observers fortunate enough to be in the right places at the right times. Late Highland summer brings the heather bloom, that extraordinary natural phenomenon that transforms entire mountainsides into flowing seas of purple and pink. This mass flowering, which typically peaks in August and September, represents one of Europe's most spectacular wildflower displays and attracts visitors from around the world who come to witness the Highland landscape at its most colorful. The heather bloom isn't just visually spectacular, it's also a crucial ecological event that provides nectar resources for countless insects preparing for winter survival or migration. The timing of the heather bloom has been refined by thousands of years of evolution to coincide with the maximum need of Highland insect populations, creating one of nature's most perfectly synchronized ecological events. Highland autumn begins while summer flowers are still at their peak, a seasonal overlap that creates some of the year's most complex and beautiful color combinations. As heather continues to bloom in shades of purple and pink, rowan trees begin their spectacular display of autumn color, their leaves turning brilliant red and orange, while their berries ripen to provide crucial food resources for birds preparing for migration or winter survival. September and October bring dramatic changes to Highland weather patterns as the moderating influence of summer warmth gives way to the increasingly unpredictable conditions that characterize Highland autumn. Clear, warm days can alternate with storms that remind Highland residents and visitors that winter is never far away in these northern mountains. Highland deciduous trees, though less common than in southern regions, create spectacular autumn displays wherever they occur. Birch groves turn brilliant yellow, while scattered oak and ash trees contribute oranges and browns to the highland color palette. These deciduous displays are often enhanced by their highland settings, where autumn colors are reflected in still lochs and contrasted against the evergreen backgrounds of Scots pines and the purple-brown of dormant heather. The Highland wildlife community responds to autumn's arrival with intensive preparation activities that demonstrate the challenging nature of Highland winters. Red deer engage in the dramatic rutting season that sees stags competing for the right to lead herds of hinds through the coming winter. The roaring of red deer stags echoing across Highland glens in October represents one of Scotland's most primal and stirring natural sounds. Highland birds that don't migrate begin the complex behavioral and physiological changes that will allow them to survive months of harsh weather and limited food availability. Ptarmigan molt from their brown summer plumage to pure white winter camouflage, while red grouse seek out the most sheltered and food-rich territories that will support them through the lean months ahead. Highland winter arrives gradually, beginning with frost in the high corries in October and extending through the entire landscape as temperatures drop and daylight hours shrink dramatically. By December, Highland Scotland experiences only 6 hours of daylight, creating long nights that test both wildlife and human residents' ability to maintain activity and morale through the darkest months. Highland winters vary dramatically from year to year, with some seasons bringing relatively mild, wet conditions, while others deliver prolonged periods of snow and bitter cold that transform the landscape into an Arctic environment. These variations keep Highland ecosystems resilient and prevent any single species from becoming too perfectly adapted to specific winter conditions. Snow transforms Highland landscapes more dramatically than perhaps any other weather phenomenon, simplifying complex topography into flowing white forms while revealing landscape patterns that are invisible during other seasons. Highland mountains under snow take on sculptural qualities that emphasize their geological structure and the paths carved by ancient glaciers. Wildlife that remains active during Highland winters demonstrates remarkable adaptations to challenging conditions. Red deer develop thick winter coats and learn to dig through snow to reach buried vegetation, while ptarmigan survive mountain blizzards by burrowing into snowdrifts that provide insulation from wind and extreme cold. Highland plants employ various strategies for winter survival, from the evergreen needles of Scots pines that continue photosynthesis whenever temperatures permit, to the dormant root systems of heather and grasses that wait beneath the snow for spring's return. These different approaches to winter survival create the diverse plant communities that support Highland wildlife throughout the year. The shortest days of Highland winter, around the winter solstice in December, bring a special quality of light that transforms even familiar Highland landscapes into magical environments. The low angle of the winter sun creates dramatic shadows and highlights that emphasize landscape textures, invisible during other seasons, while the brief daylight hours seem to concentrate beauty into moments of extraordinary intensity. Highland winter storms demonstrate the raw power of weather systems that originate in the North Atlantic and strike these mountain landscapes with wind, snow, and rain of remarkable intensity. These storms remind Highland residents that they live in one of Europe's most challenging environments, where survival depends on preparation, skill, and respect for natural forces beyond human control. Yet Highland winter also offers moments of extraordinary beauty and peace, when snow muffles all sound except the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of ravens navigating the white landscape. These quiet moments reveal Highland winter as a season of contemplation and renewal, a time when the landscape rests and gathers strength for the coming spring. The cycle completes itself as February days begin to lengthen noticeably, and Highland residents start to watch for the first subtle signs of spring's return. This seasonal rhythm, repeated for thousands of years, creates the temporal framework within which all Highland life operates, from the smallest insects timing their emergence to the great seasonal migrations of birds following ancient routes across Highland skies. Understanding the Highlands' seasonal rhythms helps us appreciate the remarkable resilience and adaptability of both wildlife and plant communities that have learned to thrive in these challenging conditions. Each season brings its own gifts and demands, creating a complex annual cycle that rewards those who learn to read its patterns while challenging those who attempt to impose their own expectations upon Highland weather and Highland time. As we witness this complete seasonal cycle, we begin to understand that Highland landscapes aren't static backdrops for human activity, but dynamic, living systems that change constantly while maintaining essential characteristics that have defined them for thousands of years. This seasonal dance connects us to rhythms far older than human civilization, while reminding us that we too are part of natural cycles that extend far beyond our individual lives and experiences. Beyond the ancient clan histories and prehistoric monuments, the Highland landscape holds countless stories of individual lives shaped by the demands and gifts of mountain living. These are the quieter tales of crofters and shepherds, weavers and storytellers, whose daily experiences created the human dimension of Highland culture, and whose descendants continue to find ways to live meaningful lives in these challenging but rewarding environments. The Highland croft, that distinctive combination of small farm and Highland home, represents one of humanity's most successful adaptations to marginal mountain environments. Crofting developed over centuries as Highland communities learned to extract sustainable livelihoods from landscapes that could never support intensive agriculture, but offered diverse resources to those who understood how to use them wisely. A traditional Highland croft typically consisted of a few acres of improved land suitable for growing oats, barley, and potatoes, combined with rights to graze cattle and sheep on extensive areas of common hill ground. This system allowed Highland families to maintain livestock numbers that would have been impossible on their improved ground alone, while spreading grazing pressure across large areas of mountain terrain. The Highland croft house itself evolved to meet the specific challenges of mountain weather and available building materials. Built from local stone with walls thick enough to provide insulation against Highland winters, these houses often incorporated the byre for cattle into the same building as human living quarters, creating efficient heat exchange systems that helped both people and animals survive harsh weather. The most distinctive feature of Highland croft houses was often the black house design, where thick stone walls supported thatched roofs held down with stone weights against Highland gales. These buildings, while appearing primitive to modern eyes, represented sophisticated adaptations to local climate conditions, using available materials in ways that provided maximum comfort and protection with minimum energy expenditure. Highland women played crucial roles in croft management, often taking primary responsibility for dairy production, poultry keeping, and the complex textile work that provided both clothing and cash income for Highland families. The famous Harris tweed industry developed from Highland women's traditional skills in spinning, dyeing, and weaving wool from Highland sheep, creating products whose quality reflected generations of accumulated expertise. The rhythms of croft life followed seasonal patterns that connected human activities directly to Highland weather and the natural cycles of plants and animals. Spring meant preparing ground for planting, often involving the entire community in cooperative work parties that combined necessary labor with social activities that reinforced community bonds. Highland peat cutting, essential for providing fuel for cooking and heating, required careful timing and community coordination. Peat had to be cut during dry periods when it could be properly dried, but the work was too demanding for individual families to complete alone. Community peat cutting became an important social institution that combined essential work with opportunities for storytelling, music, and courtship. Summer brought the ancient tradition of taking cattle to the high pastures, a practice that continued well into the 20th century in remote highland areas. These summer settlements, called sheelings, provided highland young people with semi-independent experiences that taught crucial survival skills while allowing cattle to take advantage of mountain pastures that would otherwise go unused. The shealing tradition also preserved important cultural practices that might otherwise have disappeared under pressure from modernization. Away from the oversight of ministers and government officials, highland communities at summer pastures maintained traditional music, storytelling, and spiritual practices that connected them to pre-Christian highland traditions. Highland harvest seasons required entire communities to work together against the constant threat of early winter weather that could destroy crops before they could be safely gathered and stored. The Highland harvest was often a race against time, with families helping each other in strict rotation to ensure that everyone's crops were saved before winter storms arrived. The potato, introduced to Highland Scotland in the 18th century, initially seemed like a miraculous solution to Highland food security problems. Potatoes could thrive in Highland climates and soils that defeated grain crops, and they provided more nutrition per acre than traditional Highland crops. However, this apparent blessing became a curse when potato blight struck Highland communities in the 1840s. The Highland potato famine, while less famous than the Irish famine of the same period, devastated Highland communities that had become dependent on potato crops. Entire townships faced starvation, leading to one of the most tragic chapters in Highland history, as families that had lived in specific glens for generations were forced to abandon their ancestral homes. The Highland clearances that followed represented a fundamental transformation of Highland society, as traditional crofting communities were displaced to make way for large-scale sheep farming operations that seemed more economically viable to Highland landlords. These clearances scattered Highland families across the globe, creating Highland diaspora communities in North America, Australia, and other distant locations. Yet Highland emigration also preserved Highland culture in unexpected ways, as displaced Highland families carried their traditions, music, and languages to new lands, where they often found more freedom to maintain their cultural practices than they had experienced in Scotland under post-Culloden restrictions. Highland communities in Nova Scotia, North Carolina, and New Zealand kept Gaelic traditions alive during periods when they were actively suppressed in Scotland itself. The Highland communities that remained in Scotland after the clearances faced the challenge of rebuilding their societies under very different circumstances. The Crofters Act of 1886 provided legal protections for Highland tenants that had been absent during the clearance period, giving Highland families secure tenure that allowed them to invest in improvements without fear of arbitrary eviction. Modern Highland crofting represents a remarkable survival and adaptation of traditional Highland land use practices to contemporary conditions. Contemporary Highland crofters often combine traditional agricultural activities with modern economic opportunities, running bed and breakfast establishments, producing specialty foods, or offering guiding services that allow visitors to experience Highland landscapes through local eyes. Highland shepherding represents another continuing tradition that connects modern Highland residents to centuries of mountain experience. Highland shepherds develop intimate knowledge of their territorial ranges that rivals the geographic expertise of any professional scientist. Understanding how weather patterns, seasonal changes, and animal behavior interact across complex mountain landscapes. The Highland shepherd's year follows ancient patterns that have changed little despite modern technology. Spring means checking for newborns, lambs, and moving flocks to fresh pastures as snow retreats from the high ground. Summer requires constant vigilance against predators and parasites, while maximizing the use of highland grazing that provides essential nutrition for growing animals. Highland sheep themselves represent one of the most successful biological adaptations to mountain conditions, with breeds like the Highland Blackface and Scottish Blackface developing remarkable abilities to survive harsh weather while finding adequate nutrition in challenging environments. These hardy breeds often demonstrate intelligence and independence that surprises visitors accustomed to lowland sheep that require constant human supervision. Highland wool production continues traditional practices that have sustained Highland communities for generations, though modern Highland wool is increasingly valued for specialty textile applications rather than basic clothing production. Highland wool's unique qualities, developed through generations of adaptation to mountain conditions, create products with distinctive characteristics that command premium prices in international markets. The Highland weaving tradition continues through contemporary artisans who combine traditional techniques with modern design sensibilities, creating products that honor Highland heritage while meeting contemporary aesthetic and functional requirements. These modern Highland weavers often work from home studios that allow them to maintain rural Highland lifestyles while participating in global craft markets. Highland music traditions have experienced remarkable revivals in recent decades, as modern Highland communities have rediscovered the wealth of musical heritage preserved in both oral tradition and written collections. Highland fiddle playing, piping, and Gaelic singing continue to evolve while maintaining connections to traditional styles and repertoires. Contemporary Highland musicians often combine traditional Highland music with influences from other musical traditions, creating fusion styles that reflect the reality of modern Highland communities that maintain local identity while participating in global cultural exchanges. Highland music festivals have become important cultural institutions that celebrate both traditional and contemporary Highland musical achievement. Highland storytelling traditions continue through modern Highland authors who draw upon the landscape and cultural heritage of their mountain communities to create literature that speaks to universal human experiences. These writers often find that Highland settings provide powerful metaphors for exploring themes of survival, community, and the relationship between human ambition and natural limitation. Modern Highland tourism has created new economic opportunities for Highland communities, while also presenting challenges related to preserving authentic Highland culture and protecting fragile Highland environments from overuse. Highland communities have learned to balance the economic benefits of tourism with the need to maintain the qualities that make Highland landscapes attractive to visitors in the first place. Highland environmental stewardship has become a crucial concern for modern Highland communities that understand their responsibility to preserve Highland landscapes for future generations. Contemporary Highland conservation efforts often combine traditional Highland land management practices with modern scientific understanding, creating approaches that honor historical Highland relationships with the landscape while addressing contemporary environmental challenges. Highland renewable energy projects, particularly wind and hydroelectric installations, represent attempts to create sustainable economic opportunities that take advantage of Highland natural resources without destroying the landscape qualities that define Highland identity. These projects often generate community debate about how to balance economic development with landscape preservation. Highland education continues to play crucial roles in maintaining Highland communities and Highland culture, with schools serving as centres for preserving Gaelic language and Highland traditional knowledge, while also preparing Highland young people for participation in modern economies. Many Highland schools incorporate outdoor education programs that teach Highland environmental knowledge alongside standard academic subjects. Highland crafts and traditional skills experience periodic revivals as Highland communities rediscover the value of traditional knowledge and techniques that had seemed obsolete in previous decades. Highland traditional building, Highland textile work, and Highland food preservation techniques often prove surprisingly relevant to contemporary concerns about sustainability and environmental responsibility. The human stories that continue to unfold in Highland landscapes today demonstrate the remarkable adaptability and resilience of Highland communities that have learned to thrive in challenging environments while maintaining cultural identities that connect them to thousands of years of Highland experience. These contemporary Highland stories remind us that Highland landscapes continue to shape and be shaped by human lives that find meaning and purpose in one of Europe's most demanding but rewarding environments. As we listen to these human stories echoing across Highland glens and peaks, we understand that Highland landscapes are not just scenic backdrops, but living communities where past and present continue to interact in ways that create ongoing stories of adaptation, survival, and creative response to the demands and opportunities offered by life among these ancient mountains. In our final exploration of Highland landscape, we turn to perhaps the most mysterious and defining characteristic of these ancient mountains: the mist that seems to possess a life and consciousness of its own. Highland mist is far more than simply a weather phenomenon. It's the Highlands' visible breath, the manifestation of the eternal conversation between earth and sky that creates the mystical atmosphere for which these mountains are renowned throughout the world. Highland mist begins its existence in the vast expanse of the North Atlantic, where warm ocean currents release moisture into air masses that travel eastward toward the Scottish coast. As these moisture-laden winds encounter the Highland mountains, they're forced upward into cooler atmospheric layers where their invisible water vapor condenses into the visible droplets that create Highland's signature shroud of mystery. This process, known as orographic precipitation, means that Highland peaks literally pull moisture from the sky, creating localized weather patterns that can vary dramatically within short distances. A glen that lies in brilliant sunshine might be separated by only a few miles from another glen completely engulfed in mist, creating a landscape of constantly shifting moods and atmospheres. The formation of Highland mist is also influenced by the complex topography carved by ancient glaciers, as valleys, corries, and loch basins create channels and basins where mist gathers and pools like a visible liquid. This topographic influence means that Highland mist follows predictable patterns, filling certain glens and avoiding others in ways that local residents learn to read like a familiar language. Highland mist moves through the landscape with its own rhythm and purpose, flowing down mountainsides like slow waterfalls, pooling in valley bottoms like ethereal lakes, and streaming through mountain passes like ghostly rivers. Watching Highland mist in motion reveals landscapes within landscapes, as familiar mountains appear and disappear, transform their apparent shapes, and create entirely new vistas that exist only for moments before dissolving back into grey obscurity. The quality of Highland mist varies dramatically depending on atmospheric conditions, season, and time of day. Summer mist often possesses a gentle, nurturing character that softens highland landscapes without completely obscuring them, creating conditions perfect for photography and contemplation. These summer mists frequently lift and reform throughout the day, creating dynamic displays of revelation and concealment that keep highland landscapes constantly interesting. Winter highland mist can be far more dramatic and challenging, often accompanied by driving rain or snow that reduces visibility to mere yards and creates hazardous conditions for mountain travel. Yet even these harsh mists possess their own austere beauty, transforming highland landscapes into abstract compositions of grey tones and simplified forms that emphasize the fundamental structure of mountain topography. Highland mist creates its own acoustic environment, muffling distant sounds while amplifying nearby ones in ways that can disorient visitors unaccustomed to navigating by sound alone. The acoustic properties of mist-shrouded highland landscapes often seem to compress space, making distant objects sound nearby, while nearby sounds seem to come from unexpected directions. For highland wildlife, mist provides both opportunities and challenges that have shaped evolutionary adaptations over thousands of years. Red deer use highland mist as camouflage that allows them to move undetected across open moorland, while their acute hearing helps them navigate safely through mist-shrouded terrain where visual cues become unreliable. Highland birds demonstrate remarkable abilities to navigate through mist that would challenge even experienced human travelers. Golden eagles can hunt effectively in mist conditions that would ground most other raptors, using their extraordinary eyesight and intimate knowledge of their territorial topography to locate prey and avoid obstacles invisible to other creatures. The highland mist also creates unique microclimates that support specialized plant communities found nowhere else in Britain. Oceanic bryophytes, mosses, and liverworts that require constantly moist conditions thrive in highland environments where mist provides steady moisture supplementation that allows them to survive in locations that would otherwise be too dry. Highland lichens, those remarkable partnerships between fungi and algae, reach extraordinary diversity and abundance in mist-shrouded environments where they coat trees, rocks, and soil with complex communities that add texture and color to highland landscapes, while indicating exceptional air quality and environmental stability. Highland mist plays crucial roles in highland hydrology, providing water input that supplements rainfall and helps maintain the steady flow of highland burns during dry periods. This moisture contribution is particularly important at higher elevations, where direct rainfall may be inadequate to support the diverse plant communities that characterize highland peaks and ridges. The cultural significance of highland mist extends deep into Scottish tradition and folklore, where it's often portrayed as a supernatural phenomenon that conceals otherworldly inhabitants and creates conditions where normal rules of time and space become suspended. Highland legends frequently feature heroes or heroines who become lost in mist only to emerge in different times or places, suggesting ancient recognition of mist's power to transform familiar landscapes into alien territories. Highland Gaelic contains numerous words for different types of mist and fog, reflecting the intimate knowledge that Gaelic speakers developed about atmospheric conditions that profoundly influenced daily life in mountain communities. This linguistic sophistication demonstrates that Highland people recognized mist not as a single phenomenon, but as a complex family of related atmospheric conditions, each with its own characteristics and implications for human activities. Highland artists and writers have long recognized mist as one of the Highlands' most inspiring and challenging subjects, simultaneously concealing and revealing landscape features in ways that create constantly changing compositions. Highland mist defeats simple representation, requiring artistic approaches that capture mood and atmosphere rather than merely recording visual details. Contemporary Highland photographers often find that mist provides their most rewarding working conditions, as the interplay between visible and hidden landscape elements creates opportunities for images that suggest mystery and depth impossible to achieve in clear weather conditions. Highland mist transforms ordinary landscapes into extraordinary artistic subjects that seem to exist at the boundary between reality and dream. Highland weather forecasting must account for the complex local patterns created by interaction between regional weather systems and Highland topography, making accurate prediction of mist formation and movement one of the most challenging aspects of Highland meteorology. Local Highland residents often develop better understanding of their area's mist patterns than professional meteorologists working with regional data. Highland mist safety requires knowledge and skills that differ significantly from general mountain safety principles, as traditional navigation techniques become unreliable when visibility drops to a few yards. Highland travelers must learn to navigate by compass and map alone, developing confidence in their technical skills that allows them to move safely through terrain that has become completely unfamiliar. The psychological effects of Highland mist can be profound, ranging from peaceful contemplation when experienced in safe conditions to disorientation and anxiety when encountered unexpectedly during mountain travel. Highland mist seems to affect different people in different ways, with some finding it deeply relaxing, while others experience claustrophobia or unease in conditions where the familiar world has been reduced to a few yards of visibility. Highland mist creates natural meditation environments where external distractions are minimized and attention naturally turns inward. Many Highland visitors report that time spent in mist-shrouded landscapes produces unusually clear thinking or creative insights, suggesting that mist may facilitate the mental states that different traditions have recognized as conducive to wisdom and understanding. Seasonal patterns of Highland mist reflect the annual cycle of atmospheric conditions that bring different types of weather systems across Highland Scotland throughout the year. Spring mist often possesses an optimistic quality that seems to promise clearing conditions and improved weather, while autumn mist can feel more permanent and substantial, suggesting the approach of winter conditions that may persist for months. Highland mist interacts with Highland light in ways that create some of Scotland's most spectacular natural light shows, as sunlight filtering through mist creates ethereal effects that can transform ordinary Highland mornings into magical experiences. The brief moments when mist begins to lift often provide the most dramatic Highland lighting conditions, as shafts of sunlight pierce through thinning mist to illuminate selected landscape features with spotlight intensity. Highland sunrise and sunset viewed through mist create color palettes that seem too subtle and complex for human vision to fully process, with infinite gradations of gray, pink, and gold that shift constantly as mist moves and light changes. These experiences often leave observers with profound impressions that remain vivid long after the actual visual details have faded from memory. Highland mist serves as a natural filter that protects Highland landscapes from the visual pollution and distraction of modern civilization, creating conditions where observers can experience something approaching the pristine wildness that characterized Highland landscapes before human development began to alter their essential character. The presence of Highland mist often coincides with some of the Highlands' most profound experiences of natural beauty and spiritual connection, as if the mist creates conditions particularly conducive to the expanded awareness and deep appreciation that Highland landscapes seem designed to inspire. Many Highland visitors report that their most memorable and transformative Highland experiences occurred during periods when mist transformed familiar landscapes into mysterious territories that demanded heightened attention and openness to unexpected possibilities. Highland mist reminds us that Highland landscapes are not static objects to be observed and catalogued, but dynamic, living systems that constantly change and evolve in response to forces beyond human control. The ever-changing presence of Highland mist keeps Highland landscapes alive and mysterious, ensuring that even the most familiar Highland locations continue to offer opportunities for surprise and discovery. As we conclude our exploration of Highland mist and its role in creating the unique character of Highland landscapes, we carry with us an appreciation for this most ethereal aspect of Highland environment, understanding that Highland mist is not merely a weather phenomenon, but an essential element of Highland identity that helps create the sense of mystery and timeless beauty that draws people from around the world to experience the magic of Highland Scotland. In Highland mist, we encounter the Highlands' most poetic expression of the eternal relationship between earth and sky, water and stone, visible and invisible, known and unknown. Highland mist teaches us that the most profound aspects of Highland beauty often lie not in what we can see clearly, but in what remains partially hidden, suggested rather than revealed, present as mystery rather than fact. And so our gentle journey through the misty Scottish Highlands draws to its peaceful close, like Highland mist itself settling softly over the ancient peaks we've explored together. As we prepare to leave this timeless landscape of stone and heather, loch and glen, let's take a moment to gather the gifts these mountains have offered us and understand how their ancient wisdom might accompany us as we return to our everyday lives. Throughout our wanderings, we've discovered that the Highland landscape is far more than simply a collection of beautiful views or an arrangement of geological features. These mountains represent one of Earth's great masterpieces of collaboration between time and natural forces, a landscape where every glen tells stories that span millions of years, where every loch reflects not just sky and clouds, but the accumulated experiences of countless generations of Highland life. We've learned that Highland beauty emerges from hardship overcome, from the challenges that ice and wind and weather have presented to every living thing that has chosen to call these demanding mountains home. The heather that paints Highland hillsides in purple and pink each summer has earned its place through thousands of years of adaptation to acidic soils and harsh climate. The red deer that move like living spirits across Highland moors carry in their genes the wisdom of countless Highland winters survived and Highland summers celebrated. The ancient rocks beneath our feet have taught us about patience, measured not in human lifetimes, but in geological eras, about the slow processes that build mountains, and the even slower processes that wear them away. These Highland stones have witnessed the entire history of complex life on Earth, from the first simple organisms that learned to extract energy from sunlight to the human communities that learned to find meaning and beauty in Highland landscapes. Highland waters have shown us how life finds ways to flow around obstacles, how persistence and gentle pressure can carve paths through the hardest stone, and how the same water that nourishes Highland plants and animals also connects every Highland glen to the vast cycles that distribute moisture and energy around our entire planet. In Highland burns and lochs, we've seen reflections not just of Highland skies, but of our own place in the great web of relationships that sustains all life. The Highland flora has demonstrated strategies for thriving in challenging conditions that offer wisdom applicable far beyond highland landscapes. Highland plants have learned to find partnership where competition might seem more obvious, to conserve resources during difficult periods while remaining ready to take advantage of favorable opportunities, and to create communities that support mutual survival rather than individual dominance. Highland wildlife has shown us grace under pressure, the kind of dignity that comes from accepting life's challenges while maintaining the essential qualities that define authentic existence. Highland golden eagles don't struggle against highland weather, but learn to use highland winds and highland topography to achieve their purposes with minimum effort and maximum effectiveness. The human stories woven into highland landscapes remind us that meaningful life often emerges from learning to work with natural constraints rather than against them, from developing intimate knowledge of particular places rather than seeking generic solutions that might work anywhere. Highland clan culture, crofting traditions, and contemporary Highland communities all demonstrate different approaches to the fundamental challenge of creating sustainable human societies that enhance rather than diminish the landscapes that support them. Highland sacred sites have revealed that some places on Earth seem naturally designed to facilitate experiences of connection and transcendence, that certain combinations of stone and sky, water and wind create conditions particularly conducive to the expanded awareness that different cultures have recognized as essential to fully human life. These ancient stone circles and burial cairns continue to offer opportunities for the kind of profound experience that connects us to purposes larger than our individual concerns. The seasonal rhythms of Highland landscapes have taught us about the beauty and wisdom inherent in cycles of activity and rest, abundance and scarcity, revelation and concealment. Highland seasons demonstrate that change itself can be a source of stability when it follows patterns connected to forces larger and more reliable than human planning or human anxiety. Highland mist, our final teacher, has shown us that mystery and uncertainty can be sources of beauty rather than merely obstacles to overcome, that the partially hidden and incompletely understood often possess more power to inspire and transform than the completely known and fully catalogued. Perhaps most importantly, our Highland journey has demonstrated that true beauty emerges from relationship, from the complex interactions between living and non-living systems that create patterns too intricate for any single perspective to fully comprehend. Highland landscapes achieve their extraordinary power to move and inspire human observers precisely because they represent successful solutions to the challenges of creating sustainable beauty in a dynamic, sometimes harsh, but ultimately generous world. As we prepare to carry these Highland lessons back to our own daily landscapes, we might remember that the same forces that created Highland beauty are active everywhere on Earth, that the same principles that allow Highland ecosystems to thrive can guide human communities seeking to create lives of meaning and sustainability in whatever environments we call home. The patience that built Highland mountains reminds us that the most important transformations often happen slowly, through persistent small changes rather than dramatic interventions. The resilience that allows Highland plants and animals to survive harsh Highland winters suggests that our own difficult periods might be preparation for growth and renewal that wouldn't be possible without temporary hardship. The partnership strategies that allow Highland communities to thrive in challenging environments offer models for human cooperation that honor both individual autonomy and collective responsibility. Highland landscapes demonstrate that true sustainability emerges from understanding and working with natural patterns rather than trying to impose human preferences upon natural systems. Highland beauty itself teaches us that aesthetic experience and practical wisdom need not be separate categories, that the solutions that work best in the long term are often also the most beautiful, and that learning to see and appreciate beauty might be one of our most important survival skills. As Highland mist settles around us one final time, softening the edges of our Highland exploration and preparing us for the transition back to our everyday worlds, we carry with us not just memories of beautiful views, but practical wisdom about how to live well in whatever landscape we call home. The Highland Mountains will continue their ancient conversation with sky and weather, season and time, whether or not human observers are present to witness their daily transformations. Highland burns will continue to carry Highland rain toward Highland lochs and eventually to the sea. Highland plants and animals will continue their complex seasonal dances of survival and renewal. But something has changed through our shared journey. We've learned to see Highland landscapes not just as scenic backdrops, but as communities of relationships that demonstrate principles of beauty and sustainability that apply far beyond Highland boundaries. We've discovered that paying attention to the patterns and processes that create natural beauty can teach us how to create human lives and human communities that contribute to, rather than detract from, the ongoing creativity of our living planet. Rest now and let Highland peace settle around you like Highland mist, gentle and all-encompassing. Let Highland wisdom seep into your dreams like Highland rain soaking into Highland peat, slowly and thoroughly, until it becomes part of your own landscape of understanding. Sleep well, and may your own life's seasons follow the Highland rhythm of patient preparation, abundant celebration, graceful change, and peaceful rest, knowing that you carry within you now something of the timeless strength and beauty that makes the Highland landscape a source of renewal and inspiration for all who learn to see with Highland eyes and hear with Highland hearts. Good night, and sweet Highland dreams.